Emily Harper almost said no to the party, and for a long moment, she stood by the bedroom window watching the gray Seattle sky sink into evening, wondering when her life had started to feel so carefully scheduled and emotionally quiet. The invitation to Daniel's company winter gala sat open on the dresser, cream paper with gold letters that once would have made her excited, but now only reminded her how long it had been since she and her husband had simply enjoyed each other without thinking about work emails, school pickups, or the mortgage payment due next week. She loved Daniel deeply. She knew that without question. But lately their love had felt organized, responsible, polite, like two kind roommates managing a good life instead of two people who once stayed up until 2 in the morning talking about dreams in their tiny Portland apartment. Back then, they had counted coins for takeout and danced in the kitchen while waiting for pasta to boil, laughing so loudly the downstairs neighbor knocked on the ceiling, and Emily used to look at Daniel as if he were both her safest place and her biggest adventure. Now he was a respected project manager at a growing tech firm, calm and dependable, the kind of man who remembered deadlines and kept promises, and she was proud of him, truly proud. Yet somewhere along the way their conversations had shifted from, "What do you want to become?" to, "Did you call the plumber?" And neither of them had noticed when the shift became permanent. That evening, Daniel stood in the doorway, adjusting his tie, watching her with a soft expression that was hard to read, and when he told her she looked beautiful in her navy dress, she smiled because she appreciated the compliment, but she also wondered if he saw her or just the effort she put into looking put together. She had chosen the dress carefully, something elegant but simple, something that made her feel like the woman she used to be, confident, warm, a little bold. And as she fastened her earrings, she caught her reflection and searched for that spark in her own eyes. The house felt too quiet without the kids, who were spending the night at her sister's place, and the silence gave space to thoughts she usually pushed away. When was the last time Daniel reached for her hand without thinking? When was the last time they laughed over nothing? She didn't blame him, not really. She knew how hard he worked, knew the pressure he carried to provide and succeed, and she admired his discipline. But admiration was not the same as closeness, and lately she missed the easy warmth that used to fill the space between them. When they walked to the car, the cold air brushed against her bare arms, and Daniel quickly draped his coat over her shoulders, a small gesture that stirred something tender in her chest, because he still noticed when she was cold, still cared in quiet ways, and she wondered if maybe she had been unfair in her silent doubts. The drive downtown was smooth but mostly quiet, city lights reflecting on rain-slick streets, soft music playing from the radio, and Emily watched Daniel's profile as he focused on the road, remembering how she used to feel a thrill just sitting beside him, as if the future were a wide-open map and they were brave enough to explore every corner together. Now the future felt planned, stable, safe, and she was grateful for that safety. But she also longed for surprise, for something unexpected that would remind her they were still more than routine. When they arrived at the hotel, tall and glowing against the dark sky, Daniel stepped out first and hurried around to open her door, offering his hand as she stepped onto the curb, and there was something steady and intentional in the way he looked at her that made her heart beat a little faster, though she could not have explained why. Inside, the lobby buzzed with polished laughter and clinking glasses, people dressed in formal wear greeting each other with confident smiles, and Emily felt a flicker of insecurity as she smoothed her dress, suddenly aware of the successful, stylish crowd around them. Daniel's colleagues greeted him warmly, praising a recent project he had led, and Emily stood beside him, smiling and nodding, proud yet strangely distant, as if she were watching his world from just outside the circle. She told herself not to overthink, not to let small fears grow into heavy stories, but it was hard to ignore the quiet question in her mind. Did he still see her as his partner in everything, or only as part of his stable home life? As they entered the ballroom, warm lights shimmered across crystal glasses and white tablecloths, and a live band played soft jazz near the stage, creating a romantic atmosphere that felt almost ironic to Emily, because romance lately had felt like something they scheduled instead of something that happened naturally. Daniel placed his hand lightly at the small of her back as they walked farther inside, and that simple touch grounded her, reminding her that whatever doubts she carried, this was still the man who held her hand during hospital visits, who stayed up assembling cribs before their first child was born, who whispered, "We've got this," during moments of uncertainty. Love had not disappeared, she knew that, but it had grown quiet, and quiet love can sometimes feel like absence if no one speaks it aloud. She took a slow breath and decided, standing there beneath the golden lights, that she would try tonight. Not to test him, not to measure him, but to simply be present, to look at him the way she once had, with openness instead of guarded expectation. She did not expect the night to change anything, did not expect dramatic gestures or emotional speeches. She only hoped for a small sign that the connection they built years ago was still alive beneath the layers of responsibility. As Daniel leaned close and asked if she was ready, his voice warm near her ear, Emily nodded, unaware that before the night ended, the distance she had quietly feared would be challenged in a way she never saw coming, and as they stepped fully into the glow of the party, she felt the faint, fragile beginning of something she had almost forgotten: anticipation. The ballroom felt warmer as the night moved forward, and Emily stayed close to Daniel while he greeted coworkers, accepted praise, and laughed at small jokes that seemed to come easily to him, and she admired how confident he looked in his tailored suit, how naturally he stepped into conversations about deadlines and team growth. Yet the more he blended into that bright circle of success, the more she felt like a soft shadow at his side, smiling when introduced, shaking hands, answering polite questions about the kids and her freelance design work, all while sensing an invisible wall rising inch by inch between them. When a woman named Claire, tall and poised with effortless charm, joined their group and complimented Daniel on his leadership, Emily noticed the way Daniel smiled in appreciation, professional and kind, but something about the ease of their exchange made her stomach tighten. Not because she doubted him, but because she suddenly wondered if this world, this polished and ambitious world, fit him better now than the quiet creative life they once shared in their small apartment years ago. Emily stepped aside to give them space to talk about upcoming projects, telling herself she was being mature. Yet as she moved toward the refreshment table, she felt the familiar sting of comparison, questioning whether she had changed too much, whether motherhood and routine had softened the bold spark she used to carry so proudly. She picked up a glass of sparkling water and watched couples glide across the dance floor as the band shifted to a slow love song, the kind that wraps around the heart without warning, and memories rushed in. Daniel pulling her close in their kitchen, music playing from his old phone speaker, both of them barefoot on cold tile, laughing because they barely had room to turn without bumping into the fridge. Back then, they had nothing but each other and a second-hand couch, yet she had felt rich in attention and affection. Now they had stability, savings, plans for the future. Yet she sometimes felt emotionally alone, and that contrast unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. Across the room, she saw Daniel still deep in conversation, animated but respectful, and she realized it wasn't about jealousy at all. It was about longing. Longing to feel chosen in the middle of a crowded room, longing for him to look across the space and search for her the way he once did automatically. She tried to brush off the thought, reminding herself that love grows up, that passion settles into comfort, that real marriages are built on patience and shared effort, but even strong love needs attention, and she feared theirs had been running quietly on habit instead of intention. A colleague's wife approached Emily and began friendly small talk about schools and neighborhoods, and Emily answered kindly, yet her focus kept drifting back to Daniel, hoping he would glance her way, hoping for a simple smile meant only for her. When he finally did look in her direction, their eyes met for a brief second, and he gave her a soft nod as if to check that she was okay, and though it was small, that gesture eased something inside her, proving he had not forgotten she was there. Still, the ache lingered, subtle but real, and as the music swelled again, she felt tears threaten her composure for reasons she struggled to name. So she excused herself and walked toward the edge of the balcony doors, where cooler air slipped inside, needing a moment to breathe and steady her thoughts. She wasn't angry at him. She wasn't even truly upset. She was simply confronting a truth she had avoided, that somewhere along the way they had both stopped expressing love out loud, assuming the other understood. assuming commitment alone was enough to carry them through seasons of stress. She remembered the early days of their marriage when they would leave handwritten notes on the counter, when Daniel would send midday messages just to say he missed her, when she would surprise him with late-night drives to watch the city lights, and she realized neither of them had stopped caring. They had simply become efficient, focused, practical, and practicality, though necessary, does not replace tenderness. The band announced another slow song, and couples began pairing up again, and Emily watched them with a mix of hope and sadness, wondering if Daniel would come find her or if the night would continue with polite distance. She told herself not to measure their marriage by one party, not to let insecurity rewrite years of shared history, yet emotions rarely listen to logic, and she felt small against the glittering backdrop of the ballroom, like a supporting character in her own love story. Just as she considered slipping quietly into the hallway to gather herself fully, she heard her name, M, spoken in a tone she recognized instantly, warm yet serious, and she turned to see Daniel walking toward her, not hurried, not distracted, but focused, his expression different now, thoughtful and determined. In that moment, her heart pounded with sudden uncertainty, because there was something in his eyes she had not seen in months, something deeper than casual affection, and as he stopped in front of her and asked softly if he could steal her for a minute, she sensed that whatever distance had been stretching between them was about to be addressed in a way she never expected, and as he gently took her hand and led her back toward the center of the ballroom, Emily had no idea that the quiet ache she carried would soon be met with words powerful enough to change the entire night. When Daniel reached the center of the ballroom with Emily's hand in his, she assumed he only wanted to dance, but instead of stopping near the other couples, he gently released her fingers and walked toward the stage where the band was finishing a song. And before she could ask what he was doing, he leaned toward the lead singer, said a few quiet words, and then, to her complete shock, accepted the microphone. The music faded, soft chatter settled into curious silence, and Emily felt her pulse rush in her ears, because Daniel was not a man who enjoyed public attention. He avoided spotlights whenever possible, so seeing him standing there under warm lights, shoulders straight, yet eyes slightly nervous, made her heart race with a mix of fear and confusion. He cleared his throat and gave a small, humble smile to the crowd, thanking everyone for giving him a moment, and a few friendly voices cheered his name, but his gaze searched only for Emily, who stood frozen near the dance floor, unsure whether to feel proud or worried. He began by joking lightly about how he preferred spreadsheets over speeches, earning gentle laughter that relaxed the room, yet his tone shifted quickly into something deeper, something honest, and Emily sensed that this was not about work at all. He spoke about long hours, about ambition, about the drive to succeed, explaining that he had always believed being a good provider meant giving his family security and comfort. And while the audience nodded in understanding, Emily felt tears gathering because she recognized the truth behind his words. He admitted that in chasing goals, he sometimes forgot to protect the simple moments that made those goals meaningful, that he had measured love by responsibility instead of presence, and the vulnerability in his voice made the room feel smaller, more intimate, as if every person there suddenly remembered their own quiet mistakes. Daniel then looked directly at Emily and said her name in a way that carried years of history, telling the crowd that she had stood beside him before promotions, before bonuses, before titles, back when all they had was a tiny apartment and secondhand furniture. And he described how she used to dance with him in the kitchen without caring about tomorrow's worries, how she believed in his dreams even when they felt impossible. And Emily's breath caught because those memories, once distant and soft, now felt alive again under the glow of the ballroom lights. He reached into his jacket pocket and unfolded a small piece of paper, slightly worn at the edges, explaining that he had found it while cleaning the garage a month earlier, tucked inside an old moving box, and he read aloud the short note she had written years ago. "As long as we keep choosing each other, we'll be okay." And as those words echoed gently across the silent room, Emily felt the full weight of time, realizing how easily love can become assumed instead of spoken. Daniel confessed that he had been choosing her quietly in his heart, but had forgotten to say it out loud, had forgotten that love needs visible effort as much as silent loyalty, and he apologized, not dramatically, not with shame, but with sincerity, for allowing routine to replace romance. There was no blame in his voice, only ownership, and that humility softened every guarded corner inside Emily. He stepped down from the stage slowly, never breaking eye contact, and walked toward her with calm determination. And as he stopped in front of her, he extended his hand just as he had on their wedding day, asking if she would give him this dance, and the simplicity of the gesture, after such honest words, made her heart overflow because it wasn't about impressing anyone in the room, it was about reaching for her again. The band, sensing the emotional shift, began to play a slow melody, gentle and steady, and Emily placed her trembling hand in his, feeling warmth spread through her chest as he drew her close, one hand resting securely at her waist, the other holding hers with quiet strength. The world around them blurred as they began to sway, and though dozens of eyes watched, it felt strangely private, like they were back in their kitchen with nothing but music and hope. Daniel leaned closer and whispered that he never wanted success to cost him their connection, that he missed the sound of her spontaneous laughter, that he missed being playful and present, and hearing him speak those truths without hesitation filled her with both relief and renewed affection. She realized that her fears of fading importance had been shadows created by silence, not reality, and that he had been carrying his own quiet worries about drifting apart. As they moved gently across the floor, Daniel promised to be more intentional, to guard time for them the same way he guarded business meetings. And his words were not grand promises of perfection, but steady commitments to effort, which felt even more meaningful because they were realistic and grounded. Emily rested her head briefly against his shoulder, absorbing the familiar comfort of his embrace, and she felt something shift inside her, a reopening of trust that had never fully broken but had grown cautious. The applause that followed their dance felt distant compared to the calm certainty settling between them, and for the first time that evening, she no longer felt like a shadow at his side, but like his chosen partner once more. As the music slowed and the moment drew to a close, Daniel smiled at her with a softness she had missed for months, and in that quiet exchange of glances, she understood that love does not disappear in busy seasons. It simply waits for courage. And tonight he had found his, standing under bright lights not to impress a crowd, but to remind his wife and himself that choosing each other is a decision made again and again, even in the middle of a crowded ballroom. After the applause faded and the music returned to its gentle rhythm, the rest of the evening moved with a different energy, lighter and warmer, as if the air itself had shifted, and Emily stayed close to Daniel not out of uncertainty, but out of renewed closeness, noticing how he kept his hand at her back when they spoke to others, how he introduced her with pride not just as his wife, but as his first supporter, the woman who had stood beside him before success had a title, and each time he said it she felt seen in a way she had quietly missed. Conversations continued around them, glasses clinked, laughter rose and fell, yet nothing felt distant anymore because Daniel's attention returned to her again and again. Small glances, soft smiles, gentle touches that said without words that she mattered most in the room. Claire approached once more to congratulate him on the speech, and Emily watched calmly this time, noticing that Daniel naturally shifted the conversation to include her, asking Emily about her latest design project, and listening with real interest, not distracted, not rushed, and that simple act erased the fragile insecurity that had followed her earlier. She realized the fear had never been about another person, it had been about feeling forgotten, and tonight he had made it clear she was not. As the evening wound down, guests began collecting coats and saying goodbyes, and Daniel thanked his colleagues before guiding Emily toward the exit with quiet intention, the cool night air greeting them as they stepped outside under the city lights reflecting off rain-washed streets, and for a moment they simply stood there together, breathing in the calm after the noise, hands still linked as if neither wanted to break the connection. Emily felt peaceful but curious when Daniel hesitated beside the car instead of opening the door immediately, a thoughtful look crossing his face, and before she could ask what he was thinking, he walked around to the back seat and pulled out a small overnight bag she had not noticed earlier. She looked at him in surprise, confusion mixing with growing hope, and he explained softly that he had arranged for her sister to keep the kids for the night, and booked a room upstairs at the hotel so they would not have to rush home. No early alarms, no unfinished chores waiting in the sink, just uninterrupted time together. The gesture was not extravagant, yet it felt deeply meaningful because it showed planning, effort, intention, things that speak louder than grand words. And Emily felt her eyes fill again, not from sadness but from gratitude that he had thought beyond the speech, beyond the dance, into something lasting beyond one evening. They walked back inside the hotel lobby, quieter now, the crowd thinned, the lights dimmer, and as they stepped into the elevator alone, there was a comfortable silence between them, the kind that carries warmth instead of tension. Daniel reached for her hand again and admitted in a steady voice that he had been afraid too, afraid that in trying to build a strong future, he might slowly lose the closeness that made that future worth building. Afraid that routine had dulled the sparkle they once shared. And hearing his honesty made Emily understand that distance can grow on both sides without either person intending it. She told him she had felt the same quiet drift, that she missed laughing without checking the clock, missed dreaming out loud without discussing schedules, and instead of blaming each other, they simply acknowledged the truth, recognizing that love sometimes needs deliberate care when life becomes busy. When the elevator doors opened and they stepped into the hallway, Emily felt a gentle excitement she had not felt in years, not because of anything dramatic, but because of the simple promise of time to talk, to reconnect, to remember who they were beyond responsibilities. Inside the hotel room, warm lamplight replaced the bright ballroom glow, and the space felt calm and private, a pause from the outside world. Daniel set the overnight bag down and turned to face her fully, telling her he did not want perfect moments or grand gestures every day. He just wanted to protect what they had built, to keep choosing her in visible ways, to never let silence create doubts again. Emily stepped closer, placing her hands against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palms, and she realized that love after years of marriage is not about constant excitement, but about steady commitment refreshed with intention. She smiled and told him she was still the woman who danced in the kitchen, still the dreamer who believed in impossible ideas. She had simply been waiting for space to breathe again. He promised to help create that space, to guard evenings for them the way he guarded deadlines. And together they began talking about small changes, weekly walks without phones, music while cooking dinner, surprise notes tucked into briefcases. Not dramatic overhauls, but simple acts that keep affection alive. Hours seemed to soften as they talked and laughed, rediscovering stories they had not shared in years, and the tension that once lingered quietly between them dissolved into ease. Emily realized that what had scared her most was not conflict, but indifference, and tonight had proven that indifference had never replaced their love. It had only been hidden under stress and assumption. As the city lights shimmered beyond the window and the world outside continued its busy rhythm, Emily rested her head against Daniel's shoulder once more, feeling certain in a way she had not felt at the start of the evening, certain that love can grow tired, but also grow stronger when cared for, certain that choosing each other is less about one grand moment and more about daily courage. She had not expected a speech, a dance, or a planned night away, but what mattered most was the reminder that their marriage was not running on memory alone. It was alive, capable of renewal, capable of surprise, and as they prepared to rest with no alarm set for the morning, Emily understood that sometimes the most powerful changes begin with one brave decision to speak, one extended hand on a crowded dance floor, and one quiet promise in a softly lit room to begin again.